John Carter, a 60-year-old retired aerospace engineer, had always dreamed of a quiet life in the countryside. After decades of working in the high-pressure environment of the aerospace industry, he finally decided to retire and invest his life savings into a beautiful farmhouse with 10 acres of land just outside of Denver, Colorado. The property, which he named Carter's Haven, was more than just a retirement plan. It was a sanctuary where he could reconnect with nature and live out his golden years in peace. John's daughter, Emily, a 28-year-old environmental lawyer, had recently moved back home after completing her master's degree. Emily shared her father's passion for the land and had big plans to transform Carter's Haven into a sustainable farm that would not only provide for their family, but also serve as a model for eco-friendly agriculture in the region. Together, John and Emily worked tirelessly to restore the farmhouse, plant organic crops, and raise a small herd of heritage goats. They installed solar panels, built a rainwater collection system, and even started a small apiary to produce honey. Life on the farm was everything John had ever wanted until the day the Homeowners Association, HOA, decided to interfere. The HOA, led by a shrewd and ambitious woman named Patricia Langston, had been formed just 2 years after John purchased the property. Patricia, a former real estate developer from New York, had grand signs of transforming the rural community into a high-end suburban enclave. She saw John's farm as an eyesore relic of a bygone era that didn't fit her vision of a modern, upscale neighborhood. From the moment Patricia took over the HOA, she began targeting John and Emily with a barrage of petty complaints. She cited them for everything from the unsightly appearance of their barn to the excessive noise made by their goats. Each complaint came with a thinly veiled threat: conform to the HOA's standards or face the consequences. John, a man of principle, refused to back down. He attended every HOA meeting, filed counter-complaints, and invoked his rights under Colorado's agricultural exemptions. But Patricia was relentless. She used every bureaucratic trick in the book to make their lives difficult, and it soon became clear that she had a more sinister plan in mind. After years of constant tension with Patricia and the HOA, Emily finally conned VY and said John to take a much-needed vacation. "Dad, when was the last time you took more than a day off?" she asked one evening as they finished their chores. John reluctantly agreed, and they planned a 2-week trip to Yellowstone National Park, a place John had always wanted to visit. Before Leah VYing, John and Emily took every precaution to ensure the farm would be well cared for in their absence. They asked their trusted neighbor, Tom, to keep an eye on things and hired a local farmhand, Jake, to tend to the animals. Emily created detailed care instructions for every aspect of the farm, and John installed a new security system with cameras they could monitor from their phones. As they drove away from the farm, John couldn't shake a feeling of unease. He glanced in the rear EW mirror and saw Patricia standing at the edge of their property, watching them leave with a smug smile on her face. John and Emily's vacation came to an abrupt end on day 10 when Tom called with alarming news. "John, something strange is happening at your place," Tom said, his voice tense. "There are people I don't recognize moving in and out your house. They claim they're guests who rented your farm through some kind of vacation rental program." John and Emily exchanged horrified glances. They immediately canceled the rest of their trip and caught the next flight home. During the agonizing journey, their minds raced with worst-case scenarios. What greeted them as they drove down their long driveway was beyond anything they could have imagined. Patricia Langston stood in their driveway, dressed in a sleek business suit, gesturing emphatically at their house while arguing with a group of strangers. A rental car was parked where John's tractor should have been, and unfamiliar faces peered curiously from their front porch. John pulled up in his truck, his cowboy hat pulled low, while Emily's face filled with growing horror. Patricia's composed expression faltered for just a moment when she spotted them. She clearly wasn't expecting them back for another 4 days. "John, Emily, what a surprise," Patricia stammered, quickly recovering her professional demeanor. "We were just discussing the wonderful farm experience your property is pro-VY for our guests. Guests, John managed to say, his voice barely controlled as he stepped out of the truck. On my property? The woman Patricia had been arguing with approached them, looking confused. I'm Lisa Thompson. I paid overdue lot $2,500 to rent this farm experience for the week through Airbnb. The listing said it was managed by Mountain View Estates, HOA. Emily pulled out her phone and found the listing within seconds. There was their home, professionally photographed and described as a charming, authentic farm retreat with heritage animals and rustic charm. Available for due law $500 per night, plus cleaning fees. The property manager was listed as Patricia Langston, with 25-star reviews already accumulated. This is our home, Emily said, her voice shaking. We never authorized this. This woman has no right to be renting out our property. Patricia's smile never wavered as she pulled a document from her designer briefcase. Actually, under the recently approved Community Utilization Program, the HOA has every right to make productive use of properties during extended owner absences. It's all perfectly legal. John felt a surge of rage as the reality of what was happening hit him. Their private property, their home, had been invaded and commercialized without their knowledge, and Patricia stood there acting like it was completely normal. Legal. John's voice carried across the property as he stepped toward Patricia, pointing directly at her face. You broke into our home, moved our belongings, and started renting it out to strangers. That's breaking and entering, theft, fraud, and God knows what else. Patricia didn't flinch. The HOA bylaws clearly state that the association can take necessary measures to maintain community standards during owner absences. Your signature on the deed acceptance includes agreement to all current and future HOA regulations. Emily stepped forward, still clutching her suitcase. I'm an environmental attorney, MS. Langston. No, HOA bylaw supersedes state property law. What you've done here is criminal. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly at Emily. Perhaps you should re-VYEW the documents before making accusations. We've done nothing outside our authority. The renter, Lisa, looked increasingly uncomfortable. I just want a farm experience for my family. I had no idea this was unauthorized. It's not your fault, John assured her, though his eyes never left Patricia. You're another VY Tim of this scheme. Patricia scoffed. Scheme? This is a legitimate community improvement initiative. Your farm has been a continuous source of complaints. We're simply putting it to better use than your outdated agricultural hobbies. That's when Emily lost her composure completely. Outdated agricultural hobbies? This is our livelihood, our home, our legacy. Who gave you the right to decide what we do with our property? The community did, Patricia replied coolly. Perhaps if you maintained standard appropriate for an upscale neighborhood, measures like this wouldn't be necessary. Neighbors began to emerge from nearby houses, drawn by the commotion. Several looked shocked to see John and Emily confronting Patricia. I want everyone out of my house right now, John demanded, his voice deadly calm despite the rage building inside him. And I want a full accounting of everything you've removed, changed, or damaged. Patricia checked her watch impatiently. The current guests have a confirmed reservation through Sunday. We'll need to discuss transition arrangements that don't disrupt our community's reputation. That's when John realized she had no intention of stopping. This wasn't a misunderstanding, was a calculated takeover. After a heated argument, Patricia reluctantly arranged for Lisa to be relocated to a local hotel at the HOA's expense. As soon as they left, John and Emily entered their homer, what was once their home. The transformation was shocking. Their entrance hallway, once filled with family photos dating back generations, now displayed generic farmhouse decor purchased from some big-box store. The Levi in-room furniture had been rearranged and supplemented with rustic pieces that looked nothing like their carefully selected items. A laminated "Welcome to Mountain View Farm Experience" binder sat prominently on the coffee table. Dad, Emily called from the kitchen, her voice hollow. They've replaced all our family dishes with themed farmhouse sets. She held up a mug with "Rise and Shine on the Farm" printed across it. And there's a schedule here for authentic farm active VY ties that guests can book as add-ons. John headed toward his workshop, already dreading what he'd find. The door was now labeled Game Room. Inside, his lot $50,000 worth of specialized equipment tools he'd collected over a lifetime had vanished completely. In their place stood a pool table, a dartboard, and shelves lined with board games. My bedroom is now the country chic master suite, Emily said, appearing at the doorway, tears streaming down her face. All my personal things are ergonomy thesis research, my journals, everything. They continued their horrified inspection. John's office had become a farm planning room, with decorative antique farm tools mounted on the walls. Their family photos, important documents, and personal belongings had been haphazardly packed into boxes and stored in the basement. John checked his phone and found the Airbnb listing. The horror deepened as he scrolled through professional photos of their transformed home. "Emily, look at this," he said, handing her his phone. "They've got us booked solid for the next 3 months. 28 different groups of strangers will be rotating through our home." The final insult came when they checked the barn. Their working equipment had been pushed aside to make room for petting zoo experiences. Handwritten signs with artificially inflated authentic prices advertised egg collecting for $30 A N D T R A C T O R R I D A S F O R 30 and tractor IDs for 50. "They're monetizing every square inch of our property," Emily whispered. "Look at these projected revenues." She showed John a spreadsheet left in the welcome binder. "They're expecting to make overdue $150,000 from our farm in the next 3 months alone." John sank onto a hay bale, momentarily overwhelmed. How could they possibly think they'd get away with this? Emily's expression hardened. "Because they never expected us to fight back." The morning after their return, Tom came over with coffee and a grim expression. "John, I feel terrible about this. Patricia showed up the day after you left with what looked like official papers. She claimed you had enrolled in some new community rental program that would showcase successful integration of agricultural properties in modern communities." Tom pulled out his phone. "I was suspicious, so I took photos when they didn't notice." He showed them images of MOVYing trucks, interior decorators, and professional photographers transforming their property. One photo captured Patricia directing workers while gesturing at a clipboard. "She showed me this," Tom continued, displaying an image of a document bearing what appeared to be John's signature. "I called your cell but couldn't reach you. Now I realize they probably waited until you'd be in areas with no reception." Emily examined the document closely. "This signature is forged. Look at how the J is formed. Dad never makes that loop." While Emily continued analyzing the forged documents, John checked their disabled security system. Though the cameras had been turned off, the access log showed someone had entered their system using the master code, which only the HOA emergency contact had for genuine emergencies. "They violated at least a dozen state laws," Emily said, her legal training evident as she made notes. "Forgery, fraud, breaking and entering, theft, unauthorized commercial use of agricultural land." The most disturbing evidence came when John found a folder mistakenly left in the desk drawer. HOA executive meeting minutes marked confidential. The document detailed their property utilization initiative, with their farm explicitly named as the first target. The projected revenue would cover a due $150,000 budget shortfall from Patricia's failed community center project. Even more shocking was the section titled Resistance Management, which outlined strategies for handling their eventual discovery, including offering a minimal percentage of profits as hush money and threatening extended legal battles if they didn't cooperate. "They planned all of this," John said, his hands shaking with anger as he read further. "Listen to this. Subject property's non-conforming status makes it ideal for establishing precedent. Once established with Carter's Haven, similar approaches can be implemented with other problematic properties." Emily looked up from her legal pad. "Dad, this isn't just about our farm. They're using us as a test case to take control of any property they deem problematic in the neighborhood." If they succeed with us, every independent homeowner here is at risk. John finished reading, the full scope of Patricia's scheme becoming clear. This is about much more than just our property now. The very next morning, Patricia arrived with 2 board members in tow, Margaret from the Architectural Committee and Dennis, the HOA treasurer. They walked up the driveway with the confident stride of people who believed they held all the power. Patricia was dressed impeccably as always, not a hair out of place despite the early hour. They clearly expected to find only confused renters. Instead, they found John and Emily waiting on the porch, arms crossed, with all their documents spread out on the table before them. Patricia recovered quickly. "John, Emily, I understand you're upset, but if you'd simply read the community guidelines you agreed to—" "Save it," John interrupted. "We've already been through your so-called authorization with a fine-tooth comb. My signature was forged. The bylaw you're citing was passed without proper notification, and your entire scheme violates state law." Dennis shifted uncomfortably, but Patricia remained unfazed. "This is an approved HOA program with full board support. The community utilization clause clearly states that properties can be managed for community benefit during extended owner absences." Emily stepped forward, her legal training evident in her precise tone. "No HOA bylaw supersedes state property law. What you've done constitutes breaking and entering, theft, fraud, forgery, and unauthorized commercial use of agricultural land." Margaret looked alarmed. Patricia assured us this was completely legal. "It's perfectly legal," Patricia snapped, shooting Margaret a warning glance. Then she turned to John and Emily with that practiced smile. "But we understand your concerns. That's why we're prepared to offer you 10 fan tram of the rental income as a gesture of community cooperation." She slid a contract across the table. "This agreement would formalize your participation in our community showcase program. Your property will be professionally managed. Maintenance will be handled by our approved contractors, and you'll receive a monthly payment with minimal effort on your part." John glanced at the contract, then back at Patricia. "And if we refuse?" Patricia's smile never wavered, but her eyes turned cold. "Then things could become unnecessarily complicated. The HOA has significant legal resources. Do you really want to spend the next several years in costly litigation?" She glanced pointedly around their farm. "Legal battles can be quite expensive for operations like yours." "You're threatening us," Emily said, recording the conversation on her phone. "Not at all," Patricia replied smoothly. "I'm simply explaining the realistic outcomes of different choices. The smart decision would be to cooperate with a program that benefits everyone." She tapped the contract. "We'll need your decision by tomorrow." The next guests arrive at 3 p.m. As they turned to leave, Patricia paused. "Oh, and John, we'll need your workshop cleared completely. The game room has been our most popular amenity." After Patricia and her cronies left, John was ready to explode, but Emily placed a calming hand on his arm. "Dad, that's exactly what they want for us to react emotionally rather than strategically. They're counting on us being outmatched." She was right. Instead of confronting them directly again, they needed a smarter approach. They spent the rest of the day methodically building their case, starting with documentation of everything that had been done to their property. First, they called John's longtime attorney, Michael, who arrived within the hour. After reviewing the evidence, he confirmed what Emily already suspected. "This goes beyond HOA overreach," he said. "There are multiple violations of state law here that no homeowner agreement can override. The unauthorized commercial use of agricultural land alone is a serious offense in Colorado." Next, John's accountant, Frank, documented all missing equipment and property damages, meticulously photographing and itemizing everything with current replacement values. The total quickly exceeded $50,000. "What they've done is created an unlicensed hotel operation," Emily explained as she researched state regulations. "They're not collecting hotel occupancy taxes, they haven't registered with the state authorities, and they're violating at least 6 different health and safety codes by offering animal interactions without proper licensing." As they compiled their evidence, they discovered something even more troubling. Patricia had lied about HOA full board support. The rental documents showed she was the sole property manager, with rental payments going to an account only she controlled, not the official HOA accounts. She's using our property to solve the HOA's financial problems, but she set it up to skim money off the top, John realized, examining the payment structure. The board members probably don't even know about this separate account. By evening, they had 3 different strategies mapped out, but Emily's legal research revealed one unexpected advantage. Dad, your past role on the State Agricultural Board is exactly what we need. This isn't just a private dispute between homeowners, it's a regulatory violation that state agents would be very interested in. John nodded slowly, a plan forming. You know, in all her research about our property, there's one thing Patricia clearly missed in my background. What's that? Emily asked. Who I used to work with before retirement, John said, smiling for the first time since coming home. I think it's time to make some calls to old friends who still work in state enforcement. Patricia Langston had made one critical misjudgment. She'd assumed John was just a simple farmer who wouldn't know how to fight back against her sophisticated scheme. What she failed to discover in her research was John's professional background before retirement. For 12 years, he had served on the Colorado State Agricultural Board, helping craft the very regulation she was now violating. He still maintained close relationships with key officials in Denver, including the current Deputy Director of Agricultural Land Use Enforcement. John made his first call to James Wilson at the State Comptroller's office. James, it's John Carter. Remember that discussion we had about unauthorized commercial use of agricultural land? I'm experiencing it firsthand now. 20 minutes later, James had opened an official investigation into tax evasion related to unregistered hotel operations. John's second call went to Maria Gonzalez at the Agricultural Commission. Maria, I've got a clear case of agricultural land use violations. I need your eyes on this. She immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and promised to dispatch inspectors within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Emily was conducting her own investigation. Using her law school connections, she discovered something that changed everything. Patricia Langston had previously practiced law in New York under a different name. Patricia Merceran had been disbarred 5 years ago for almost identical schemes involving property management fraud. Dad, look at this, Emily said, showing John the New York Bar Association disciplinary records. She was disbarred for creating fraudulent property management companies and misappropriating funds. She changed her name and moved to Colorado to start over. This revelation explained Patricia's confidence and expertise in executing such a complex scheme. She'd done it before, refined her techniques, and chosen their community as her new hunting ground. Armed with this information, Emily contacted the Colorado Real Estate Commission about unlicensed property management, while John reached out to his old colleague, now serving on the state HOA regulatory committee. Within 48 hours of their calls, Patricia received sits from state investigators at both her home and the HOA office. The speed and coordination of the response clearly caught her off guard. She had expected to face only John and Emily, not the full regulatory authority of the state of Colorado. What started as a neighborly dispute had now escalated into multiple state investigations. Patricia had planned for their resistance, but she never anticipated they would have the connections and knowledge to bring the full weight of state regulatory agencies down on her elaborate scheme. The state investigators moved with surprising efficiency. Within days, they had seized records from both Patricia's home office and the HOA headquarters. What they uncovered was far worse than even John and Emily had suspected. The HOA, under Patricia's leadership, had been systematically mismanaged for years. Funds allocated for community improvements have been diverted to personal projects, including a complete renovation of Patricia's own home, disguised in the books as community office upgrades. The rental scheme using John's farm was just her latest attempt to cover financial holes before the annual audit. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Homeowners who had blindly trusted Patricia for years began calling emergency meetings. John's phone rang constantly with neighbors expressing shock and offering apologies for not questioning her authority sooner. Patricia attempted damage control by claiming John had verbally agreed to the arrangement before Leah VY not desperate lie that collapsed when confronted with the forged documents and the secret resistance management plan found in the HOA files. An emergency community meeting was called at the local community center. The room was packed when Patricia arrived, still projecting confidence in her tailored suit. That confidence VY Sibley faltered when she saw John and Emily sitting in the front row beside two state investigators. "Before we begin," announced Robert, the newly appointed interim HOA president, "we need to address the serious allegations regarding the unauthorized use of the Carter property." Patricia immediately tried to seize control of the narrative. The Community Utilization Program was approved by the board to generate needed revenue. John's resistance is merely, "The board approved no such specific action," interrupted Margaret, now clearly distancing herself from Patricia. "We were shown different documents than what was actually implemented." Patricia's face hardened as she realized her allies were abandoning her. "Everything I've done has been for the benefit of this community. The Carter farm has been an eyesore and property value liability for years." That's when Emily stood up and connected her laptop to the projector. "Before anyone accepts that version of events, the community should see what we found in our investigation." The screen filled with Patricia's New York Bar Association disbarment records, showing her pre-VYS identity and history of similar fraudulent schemes. A collective gasp filled the room. Patricia's carefully constructed facade crumbled as homeowners realized they'd been manipulated by someone with a documented history of fraud. "This meeting is over," Patricia announced, attempting to gather her papers and flee. "Actually," said one of the state investigators, blocking her path, "we have some additional questions about those separate bank accounts before you leave." The community meeting transformed from a standard HOA discussion into something resembling a public trial, with all eyes on Patricia. Emily methodically presented the EVY Denke they'd gathered, her legal training EVY Dent, and how she built the case point by point. "The scheme was never about community improvement," Emily explained, displaying the confidential HOA documents. "It was about using our farm as a test case to establish precedent." Once successful, the plan was to target other problematic properties throughout the neighborhood. Patricia attempted to interrupt several times, but the EVY Denke was overwhelming. The room grew increasingly hostile toward her as homeowners realized how close they had come to losing control of their own properties. "The most disturbing aspect," Emily continued, "is that rental payments were directed to a separate account only Patricia controlled, not the official HOA accounts. While claiming to solve the association's financial problems, she was simultaneously skimming profits." Robert, the interim president, stood up, VY Sibley angry. "I've re-VY EU'd the financial records with the state investigators. The alleged budget shortfall Patricia used to justify this scheme was largely created by her own mismanagement and unauthorized expenditures." Patricia's face had turned ashen. She no longer attempted to defend herself, as neighbors she'd intimidated for years now openly confronted her with questions about other suspicious HOA active VY ties. The board unanimously votes to remove Patricia Langston from all positions, effective immediately, Robert announced to applause. Then he turned to John and Emily. "On behalf of the entire community, we apologize for this violation. What do you need from us to make this right?" As all eyes in the community center turned to him, John stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about setting things right and ensuring nothing like this could happen again. "I've given this a lot of thought," John said, his voice steady. "I have 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, full reimbursement for all damages and missing property, totaling due law $50,000 according to our documented assessment." He paused as Robert nodded in agreement. "Second, all rental profits generated from our property will be transferred to us immediately, including funds from future bookings, which you will cancel and refund from HOA accounts, not from other homeowners' fees." Several board members exchanged glances but continued nodding. Third, our property will be permanently exempt from all HOA rules and fees going forward. We remain part of the community, but our farm operations will never again be subject to HOA oversight or interference. This caused some murmuring, but faced with potential legal action, no one objected. And one more thing, Emily added, standing beside John. The HOA must establish a legal defense fund for any other homeowners who might have been victimized by similar schemes. Every property owner here deserves protection from this kind of abuse. Robert conferred briefly with the other board members before addressing the room, all in favor of accepting these terms to avoid potential litigation and further state investigation. The vote was unanimous. Patricia, who had remained silent during their demands, finally spoke up. You can't just exempt one property from. The vote is final, Robert interrupted firmly. The terms are accepted. Patricia was forced to sell her luxury home and leave the community under threat of criminal prosecution. The new HOA board implemented transparent financial practices and dramatically reduced fees for all residents. John and Emily recovered all their equipment and received overdue law $100,000 in rental income and damages. Best of all, they used some of that money to establish proper fencing and barriers around their property, creating the farm sanctuary they always wanted. Emily even started hosting legitimate farm-to-table events that, ironically, increased neighboring property values as the area became known for authentic agricultural experiences. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about protecting your property, it's about preserving your family legacy and way of life. That HOA tyrant thought she could exploit their absence to line her pockets, but instead, she funded the expansion of the very farm she tried to control. Remember, it's not just about winning the battle, it's about changing the rules of the game entirely. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.